The winds of Salem swirled with fear in 1692, a town at the crossroads of faith, superstition, and social strife. Salem became a place where the air was thick with accusation, dread, and a bloodlust that sought out the innocent. Before the infamous trials began, there were whispers in the night, whispers that would soon grow into a deafening roar of hysteria. This is the untold story of what happened to those accused of witchcraft before they even stood trial. A story that, when revealed, will haunt you in ways you never imagined. In this video, we will journey into the darkness of Salem's past. The toll of fear, power, and desperation will unravel the grim details of the accuser's victims, those who were bound by chains of suspicion and forced into suffering long before the courtroom drama that sealed their fate. You'll be drawn into a world where innocence was no shield and no one was beyond the reach of a man's fear. Before the infamous trials began, there was a silence. A chilling silence that was broken only by the cries of those who had been wronged. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay with us as we unearth the dark truths buried in Salem's cursed history. Salem, 1692. A town gripped by fear, shaken by an invisible threat, and drowning in a sea of paranoia. Those accused of witchcraft were not given the luxury of a trial, nor were they granted the mercy of justice. Their stories began in the most harrowing of ways: isolation, torture, and despair. This chapter will bring you face to face with the terrifying practices that preceded the trials. It will paint a chilling portrait of a world where the accused were not just feared, they were broken. Every accused soul was plunged into darkness, forced to face their worst nightmare, being hunted by their neighbors, friends, and family. As rumors spread like wildfire, Salem became a cauldron of fear and chaos. In the absence of true evidence, suspicions turned into accusations, and accusations into sentences. In this chapter, we'll dive deep into the madness that consumed Salem, a madness so contagious it spread beyond reason and into the very heart of the community. We'll witness how the accusation of one person could lead to the destruction of families, and how the very nature of innocence became irrelevant in a world driven by superstition. These dark days left an indelible mark on Salem's soul, a mark that lingers, haunting the town to this day. The streets of Salem, once quiet and serene, became a battleground in 1692. As the bitter winds of winter curled through to town, a deeper chill settled in the hearts of its people. They were not just afraid of the cold. Something far darker had descended upon Salem. A storm of fear, superstition, and ignorance had begun to consume the town. It wasn't the thunder that rattled the villagers, but the whispered rumors of witches lurking in the shadows. Before the trials even began, there was almost a tangible dread that lingered in the air, choking the life out of every word spoken, every glance exchanged. Neighbors turned against neighbors. Friends whispered behind closed doors. The accused, the unfortunate few who found themselves ensnared in the web of suspicion, were thrust into a nightmare before ever stepping foot in a courtroom. Their suffering began long before their trial dates were set, because in Salem, guilt was not something that needed to be proven. It was something that could be felt, seen, and most terrifyingly, imagined. The accusations, once made, were like a chain reaction. One person would speak a name, and the accusations would pile on top of each other. The accused of witchcraft became the center of a dark storm. They were marked not by any clear evidence, but by the shadows that danced in the minds of their accusers. And what awaited them wasn't the justice they deserved, but an abyss of isolation, suffering, and torment.
The accused were often thrown into the most wretched of conditions. They were not granted a defense. They did not have the chance to plead their case. Instead, their only fate was one of fear and brutality. Women, men, children, no one was safe. Once labeled as a witch, the very essence of their being was questioned. They were no longer human. They were seen as an embodiment of evil, their lives worth nothing but the torment they endured. Take the story of Tituba, a name that has become synonymous with the Salem witch trials. She was one of the first to be accused, a woman who stood at the edges of Salem's society, vulnerable and alone. But long before she faced the courts, she had already been thrust into an agonizing limbo. Tituba was not just accused of witchcraft, she was also subjected to extreme physical and psychological suffering. She was tortured in ways that broke her spirit, not just her body. The very people who had once offered her a place in their community now turned on her, demanding confessions she did not have. And the only way to avoid further punishment, to end the torment, was to give in, to confess to something she didn't do, to claim allegiance to the devil. This wasn't an isolated incident. Anyone who found themselves accused was subjected to unimaginable treatment. They were imprisoned, often in cells that offered little to no comfort. In the cold, damp darkness of their cells, the smell of mold and sweat clung to the air. The constant echo of footsteps, the rattling of chains, and the ever-present murmur of whispers from the other prisoners kept them on edge. The only thing worse than the confinement was the psychological torture, the relentless pressure to confess, the mounting fear of what would happen if they didn't. These early moments of suffering before the trial were crucial in breaking down the spirit of the accused. And it wasn't just the physical torment they endured, it was the emotional devastation of seeing the people they had once called neighbors turn into their accusers. Some would crack under the pressure. Some, in the desperate hope of escaping the tortures they faced, would confess to crimes they did not commit. It didn't matter if their confession was true or not. The act of confessing alone made them complicit in the court's eyes. And those who remained steadfast, who denied the charges no matter the suffering, were left to rot in their cells, the uncertainty of their fate hanging over them like a dark cloud. What's perhaps most haunting is the silence of it all. This deafening silence of those who could do nothing. Even in the face of so much suffering, the weight of societal norms, religious belief, and fear silenced any opposition to the horrors unfolding. The very air was thick with terror, and for those accused, their nightmare had only just begun. Their trial might have been their final moment of hope, but for many, the suffering they endured before ever stepping into the courtroom was a fate worse than death. As the winter months wore on, the hysteria in Salem began to spread like an uncontrollable fire. It didn't just consume the minds of the townspeople, it consumed their hearts, their souls, their sense of reality. What began as whispers in darkened corners of the town became a deafening roar of accusations, fear, and violence. The rumors of witchcraft that had once been an isolated concern quickly turned into a full-blown frenzy. One after another, innocent lives were dragged into the madness, thrust into a world where reason was buried beneath layers of fear and suspicion.
It wasn't just a fear of the devil or the supernatural that drove Salem to madness. It was the desperation to find someone, anyone, to blame. When life became unbearable, when the crops failed, when disease ravaged families, when tensions ran high, it became easier to point fingers. The accusations were never based on reason. They were based on nothing more than the human need to place blame on an unseen enemy. And as the hysteria grew, so did the frenzy to find more witches. It wasn't enough to accuse a few. Now entire families were implicated, entire communities torn apart by the accusations of one person against another. Each confession, each accusation fed the fire, and it became impossible to stop. In the midst of this chaos, the people of Salem turned to the only thing they thought would save them, God. But instead of finding peace through faith, they found themselves entrenched in the fervor of a broken system. The people who sat at the top, the judges, the religious leaders, the political figures, they saw this as a chance to prove their strength, to assert their authority. They were the ones who would cleanse Salem of its evil, purging the town of witches.
But in their desperate pursuit of righteousness, they overlooked the truth. In their zeal to protect the community from what they believed was a plague of witchcraft, they turned a blind eye to the true evil, the fear that had taken over, the paranoia that infected every conversation, every glance. And as accusations mounted, so too did the brutality with which the accused were treated. The witch hunts became a full-fledged spectacle, one where cruelty and terror reigned. The court system, once a supposed bastion of justice, became a tool of torture. The accused, already subjected to months of inhumane conditions in the jails, were now thrust before a court that was more concerned with preserving the hysteria than seeking truth. Evidence, as flimsy as it was allowed to stand. The testimonies of those who claimed to see spirits, to be tormented by witches, were accepted without question. And in this fevered atmosphere, many innocent lives were sentenced to death. The fear of the unknown, the fear of what could not be seen, gave birth to the belief that any sign of otherness, a strange behavior, an unexplained illness, a mysterious death, was enough to mark someone as a witch. Women, often seen as the weaker, more vulnerable members of society, were the most likely targets of these accusations. But men were not exempt. The paranoia was so all-encompassing that no one was safe. Even the slightest deviation from the norm could spell disaster for anyone in Salem. The sick, the poor, the eccentric, all were seen as possible witches, easy scapegoats for a frightened and fractured community. The trials themselves became less about justice and more about the preservation of power. Those who resisted, who stood firm in their innocence, were often seen as guilty for their defiance. The idea of a witch, in Salem's eyes, was not just someone who practiced the dark arts. It was anyone who threatened the societal order, anyone who could challenge the narrative the town had created for itself. It was not just the physical acts of torture that scarred the accused, but the mental toll it took on them. For those who found themselves caught in this whirlwind of accusations, the damage was irreparable. The trust that had once bound communities together was shattered. Family members accused each other, friends betrayed friends, and those who were accused, many of whom had lived simple, quiet lives, found themselves trapped in a nightmare they could not escape. This madness spread through the town like a plague. Neighbors turned on neighbors, wives accused husbands, children turned on parents. The boundaries between right and wrong, between truth and lies, began to blur beyond recognition. No one could trust anyone anymore. The sheer intensity of the hysteria consumed everything in its path, and it was impossible to distinguish the innocent from the guilty, the real from the imagined.
In the end, the Salem witch trials weren't just about the victims. They were about what happens when fear grips a society so tightly that it tears apart the very fabric of trust and truth. It wasn't just a few lives that were lost. It was an entire community's sense of identity, integrity, and compassion. What was left in the wake of this hysteria was a town forever scarred, its people forever haunted by the choices they made in the heat of fear. In the aftermath of the trials, Salem did not simply return to normal. It was as if the very ground had been tainted by the blood spilled in the name of justice, the echoes of the condemned still lingering in the air. The town was left to grapple with the moral cost of what had transpired. And the deeper you delve into the legacy of Salem, the more haunting it becomes. For in the years that followed, as the truth about the witch hunt slowly surfaced, a new set of questions arose. Questions about human nature, about fear, about the very structure of power itself. What were the true costs of this madness? And what lessons would future generations learn from the ashes of Salem? The trials were not the isolated event that many thought them to be. No. They were a mirror, reflecting the fragility of societies, the ease with which the innocent can be sacrificed for fear's sake, and how deeply human nature can be warped when faced with the unknown.
The witch trials are not just a footnote in history. They are a chilling reminder of the power of mass hysteria, of how easily the truth can be buried under a pile of fear, of how a community can be torn apart by suspicion and distrust. In Salem, as in any society, the line between order and chaos is thinner than we would like to believe. The myth of the Salem witch trials, perpetuated through books, movies, and folklore, often romanticizes the events. We talk about the witches of Salem as though they were cursed or possessed, the trials as some bizarre, inexplicable moment in history. But when you look deeper, you see that the tragedy was not just in the deaths of those accused. It was in the breakdown of an entire community, the erosion of reason and the abandonment of justice for the sake of fear. The true horror lies in how normal people, under the right circumstances, can fall prey to the very same madness. And so, what remains is not just a story of innocent lives lost, but a dark reflection of the dangers of collective fear. It is a story that transcends time, reminding us of how power can manipulate, how prejudice can cloud judgment, and how the suffering of one person can ripple out and touch the lives of many. As we look back at Salem, we must ask ourselves, how much have we truly learned? When the next wave of fear rises, who will be the accused? Who will be the one to step forward and say, enough? In the end, Salem's accused witches, those who suffered unimaginable fates, stand as symbols, not just of the past, but of the present and future. They remind us of the fragility of truth, the power of collective hysteria, and the consequences of unchecked fear. It is a legacy we must carry with us, a heavy truth we can never forget. Because until we confront the darkness within ourselves, until we face the ways in which fear can turn us against one another, we remain susceptible to repeating the same mistakes that condemned so many in Salem. So as you walk away from this story, let it haunt you, not just in the way it twists your stomach or darkens your thoughts, but in the way it challenges you to look deeper into the world around you, to question, to seek truth, and to never forget the true cost of fear.